A former Navy SEAL returned to Montana carrying years of regret and planning to sell the ranch his parents left behind. But beneath a bridge collapsing in the rain, Wyatt found a wounded German shepherd mother using her body to protect 2 freezing puppies. He saved all 3, believing it would be only one more rescue before he returned to a life of silence. Then Mara began leading him toward flooded fields, hidden machines, and the truth behind a company forcing elderly ranchers to leave their homes. When Lenora, the widow who had cared for Wyatt's parents, disappeared during a storm, Mara followed her scent into a collapsing drainage tunnel. To save Lenora, the valley, and the dog who had led him home, Wyatt entered the flood and finally faced the pain he had spent years running from. Where are you watching from? And how did this story touch your heart? Please like and subscribe to help our channel reach 1,000 subscribers. Wyatt Rourke returned to Alder Creek on the last wet afternoon of April, driving through rain that slanted across the windshield like handfuls of silver nails. Northern Montana opened around him in long, familiar distances. Pale winter grass was beginning to green along the low fields. Pine forests gathered in dark patches beneath mountains whose upper ridges still carried snow. Old cattle fences leaned toward the road as if tired from holding their ground through another winter. The country had not changed enough to forgive him. Wyatt was 42, though the hard years sat unevenly on him. He stood a little over 6 feet, with a solid athletic build that had once been shaped by relentless training and later worn down by old injuries, sleepless nights, and the quiet discipline of refusing to complain. His face was square and sharply defined, with high cheekbones, a slightly crooked nose broken during an operation he never spoke about, and gray-blue eyes that still checked mirrors, crossroads, roofs, and tree lines without conscious thought. His dark brown hair was cut short, though gray had gathered at both temples. He wore a dark olive work shirt over a heather gray t-shirt, dark brown ranch pants, worn leather boots, and a scratched black military watch. The clothes were practical, almost anonymous. Wyatt had spent enough years wearing uniforms that told strangers what he was. Now he preferred clothing that explained nothing. On the passenger seat lay a thick envelope containing the deed to the Rourke Ranch, unpaid bills, livestock records, and the keys to a house he had once believed he would inherit many years from now. Inside the inner pocket of his weathered charcoal rain jacket was a second envelope. That one contained the last letter his father had written. Wyatt had carried it for 3 weeks without opening it. He told himself there had been no proper time. Airports were too crowded. Hotel rooms were too quiet. The long drive north required concentration. All of those reasons were true. None of them were the truth. His mother had died first, her heart failing after years of pretending it was stronger than it was. His father had followed 3 months later when an all-terrain vehicle slid from an icy ranch road and rolled into a drainage ditch. Wyatt had been absent for both endings. He had sent money. He had called when he could. He had promised he would visit after the next assignment, after the next transfer, after the next difficult season. Time had accepted every excuse and charged interest. Now he was coming home to sell what remained. He planned to stay long enough to inventory the cattle, meet the land agent, settle the accounts, and sign whatever documents were necessary. By the beginning of summer, the ranch would belong to someone else. Wyatt repeated that plan whenever the mountains became too familiar. Homecoming Bridge appeared beyond a bend in the road. The old concrete bridge crossed Alder Creek, where the water narrowed between 2 steep banks. Everyone leaving the valley had to pass over it. Everyone returning did too. Wyatt remembered his mother waving from the shoulder when he left at 19. His father had remained beside the truck with both hands in his coat pockets, too proud to ask his son to stay and too angry to say goodbye properly. Wyatt had not looked back after crossing the bridge. This time, the creek below was swollen with snowmelt and the first hard rain of spring. Brown water struck the support pillars and curled around them in violent eddies. Broken branches spun beneath the bridge. Chunks of red earth fell from the bank and vanished into the current. Wyatt slowed. The water was running too high for late April. He was almost across when something moved beneath the eastern span. It was not the clean movement of a deer or fox. It was low, struggling, and close to the waterline. Wyatt stopped the truck. For several seconds, he sat with both hands on the steering wheel. The old part of him had already measured the danger. The bank was unstable. The creek was rising. The ground beneath the bridge had been hollowed out by water. He had no backup, no proper rescue equipment, and a knee that no longer tolerated bad decisions. The newer part of him, the part that had driven home to sign papers and disappear again, told him the county animal service could handle it. Then the shape moved once more. Wyatt put the truck in park. Under the bridge, pressed into a narrow strip of mud between the roots of a cottonwood and the current, lay a female German shepherd. She was about 5 years old, though hardship made her seem older. Her black and tan coat was soaked and matted with clay. Her ribs showed beneath the wet fur. One amber eye remained fixed on Wyatt, while the other kept turning toward the 2 puppies tucked beneath her chest. Her right ear had a small cut near the tip. A dark mark circled her neck, where a broad working collar or tracking device had rubbed away the fur. One front leg was scraped deeply enough that blood had mixed with the rainwater and run in thin pink lines down her paw. Yet she was not curled around herself. She had placed her body between the current and her puppies. The 2 German shepherd pups were no more than 8 weeks old. The male was mostly black, with soft, uneven ears and muddy tan paws. The smaller female had more tan across her face and legs. Both were trembling so hard that their bodies shook against their mother's ribs. The water was less than 2 feet away. Wyatt pulled a tow rope from behind the truck seat and tied one end around the trailer hitch. He secured the other around his waist, then climbed over the guardrail. The slope gave beneath his first step. Pain shot through his left knee, sharp and familiar. His boot slid through wet clay, and freezing creek water poured over the leather. The mother dog lifted her head. A low growl came from her chest. It was not wild aggression. Wyatt had heard fear disguised as anger in men, children, and animals. This was a warning from a creature whose body was failing but whose duty was not. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded strange beneath the bridge, swallowed by rain and rushing water. "I see them." The dog's lips pulled back slightly. Wyatt stopped several feet away and lowered himself, keeping his shoulders turned rather than facing her directly. The male puppy whimpered. The mother shifted, forcing more of her body over him. For a moment, Wyatt assumed her hind legs were trapped beneath the roots. That would explain why she had not moved as the water rose. He crawled closer. The bank cracked somewhere above him. A fist-sized stone dropped into the creek. Wyatt reached slowly toward the first puppy. The mother dog snapped once at the empty air near his hand, then froze when another piece of soil slid from beneath her rear paw. Wyatt saw it then. Her hind legs were free. She had not been trapped. She could have climbed toward the road before the bank became this unstable. Perhaps not easily, perhaps not without pain, but she could have escaped. She had chosen to remain because the puppies could not. Something tightened behind Wyatt's ribs. Years earlier, in another part of the world, He had watched a wounded man refuse evacuation until the youngest member of their team was carried out first. Wyatt had been ordered not to go back a second time. He had obeyed. The memory never obeyed him. "All right," Wyatt whispered. "We do this your way." He removed his rain jacket and spread it on the mud. Then he reached for the male puppy. The mother growled, but she did not bite. Wyatt lifted the pup against his chest and crawled backward. The little body felt nearly weightless beneath the wet fur. Halfway up the slope, the ground shifted under his knee. The rope snapped tight around his waist. He caught the puppy with both hands before it slipped. For one terrible second, Wyatt hung sideways above the brown water, while the puppy cried inside his shirt. Then he found a root with his boot and pushed upward. He placed the puppy inside the cab, wrapped in his jacket, and returned for the smaller female. The mother dog watched him climb down again. This time she did not growl. The female puppy was colder. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Wyatt tucked her beneath his shirt until he felt the weak flutter of breath against his chest. When he reached the truck, the male puppy crawled over and pressed against his sister. Only then did Wyatt return for their mother. The bank groaned. A crack opened between the cottonwood roots and the bridge support. The dog tried to stand, but her injured front leg folded. Wyatt reached her as muddy water washed over the narrow shelf. She looked past him toward the road, toward her puppies. "They're safe," he said. "Now move." The dog stared at him, as if measuring whether a man's word had any value. Then she placed one paw forward. Wyatt slid one arm beneath her chest and the other behind her ribs. She was lighter than she should have been, but still heavy enough to punish his knee as he began climbing. The rope cut into his waist. Rain ran into his eyes. The dog did not struggle. She held herself rigid, saving what little strength remained. They were almost at the top when the earth beneath the bridge collapsed. The shelf where the dog had sheltered vanished into the creek. Roots tore loose with a sound like breaking bones. Mud and water struck the lower part of Wyatt's legs. He threw himself forward. His shoulder hit the roadside gravel. The dog landed partly across him. Behind them, the current swallowed the place where 3 animals had been lying less than a minute earlier. Wyatt stayed on the ground, breathing hard. The German shepherd lifted her head and looked toward the truck. From inside came 2 thin cries. Her body changed immediately. Pain remained, but something stronger moved through it. Wyatt helped her to the open door. She climbed awkwardly into the cab and lowered herself beside the puppies. The male pressed his nose beneath her chin. The female tucked herself against her belly. The mother closed her eyes, only for a second. Then she opened them again and watched Wyatt. The nearest veterinary clinic belonged to Dr. Celia Monroe. Celia was 44, tall and lean, with fair skin, a narrow, practical face, green eyes, and dark blonde hair tied low at the back of her neck. She wore a slate blue work shirt, dark utility pants, brown boots, and a veterinary vest filled with pens, bandage scissors, and folded gloves. She had the composed manner of a woman who had spent years dealing with frightened animals and owners who became less sensible the more frightened they were. Celia helped Wyatt carry the mother dog inside. "What happened?" "Bridgebank gave way. You went under it. There were 3 of them." "That was not my question." Wyatt looked at her. Celia sighed. "Former military. Former bad decision-maker. Those are rarely different professions." Despite her dry tone, Celia's hands were gentle. She warmed the puppies, checked their breathing, and examined the mother. The dog was dehydrated and underfed. Her ribs were bruised, though none appeared broken. The wound on her front leg was deep but clean enough to treat without surgery. While trimming muddy fur from the dog's neck, Celia found a torn strip of leather. A damaged brass tag hung from it. She wiped away the dirt with gauze. Only 4 letters remained readable. Mara. Mara, Celia said softly. The dog's left ear moved. Wyatt noticed. So she knows it. Seems that way. Celia continued cleaning the wound on Mara's leg. From beneath the matted fur, she pulled a short piece of bright orange plastic fiber. She held it beneath the examination light. Survey ribbon, she said, or something close to it. Wyatt took the fiber between 2 fingers. Could have come from anywhere. It could. Celia's expression suggested that possibility did not make the object meaningless. The puppies were cold but otherwise stable. The male recovered first, crawling out of the towel and trying to chew the corner of Celia's chart. The female watched from beneath the blanket, quieter and more calculating. Wyatt named them Pip and Cricket only because Celia needed something to write on the temporary intake forms. He made it clear the names were temporary. So is Spring, Celia said. Still keeps returning. Wyatt asked her to contact a rescue group. I don't keep dogs. Mara raised her head from the table. Celia looked at the mother, then at the 2 puppies. They appear unaware of the policy. The county shelter had no room. A recent neglect seizure had filled every kennel, and the nearest foster network could not take a nursing mother with 2 puppies for at least several days. Celia gave Wyatt antibiotics, bandages, feeding instructions, and several warnings about Mara's activity. No long walks, no rough ground, keep the wound dry. Wyatt glanced outside at the rain. Celia handed him a plastic cover for the bandage. Try harder. The Rourke farmhouse stood at the end of a muddy drive beneath 2 old cottonwoods. Its weathered white siding had faded to gray along the northern wall. The barn roof sagged slightly. Fences leaned where winter snow had pressed them down. Inside, the house smelled of cedar, dust, old coffee, and rooms that had been closed too long. His father's brown coat still hung behind the kitchen door. His mother's teacup rested upside down beside the sink. A wall calendar remained open to the month she died. Wyatt turned on the lamp above the stove, but left the rest of the house dark. Pip escaped his towel first and marched directly into one of Wyatt's father's old boots. Only his back legs remained visible. Cricket discovered the battered cowboy hat resting on a chair. She circled twice, stepped inside, and curled against the worn, felt as though someone had prepared the bed specifically for her. Wyatt stared at them. The house had been silent for months. Now it contained squeaking, scratching, small sneezes, and the sound of Pip attempting to defeat a bootlace. Mara lay between the puppies and the front door. She did not sleep deeply. Near midnight, Wyatt woke to the sound of claws moving across the floor. He found Mara standing on the porch in the rain. The plastic cover protected her bandage, but her body had gone rigid. A diesel engine sounded along the distant road, not smooth. One cylinder missed every few seconds, creating an uneven rhythm Wyatt could feel more than hear. A truck moved slowly beyond the trees. Its lights swept across the wet pasture. For an instant, Wyatt saw the outline of a driver wearing a yellow raincoat. Mara lowered her head. She stepped backward once, but her amber eyes followed the vehicle until darkness swallowed it. Wyatt went inside for a blanket. When he returned, a second piece of orange plastic fiber lay on the porch boards beneath Mara. He placed it beside the fragment Celia had removed from her wound. The fibers matched. Wyatt did not know where Mara had come from. He did not know who had hurt her, why orange survey ribbon was tangled in her coat, or why the sound of that truck had changed her breathing. But somebody in Alder Creek might know. Before turning off the kitchen light, Wyatt saw Mara walk toward the closed door of his father's old storage room. She pressed her nose to the narrow gap beneath it. Then she lowered herself onto the floor and lay facing the hallway, exactly where a working dog might position herself to guard a place she already knew. Wyatt stood motionless in the darkened kitchen. He had believed he brought a lost dog home. For the first time, he wondered whether Mara had been trying to come home long before he was. 10 days after the rescue, Wyatt Rourke had called every animal shelter, foster network, and German Shepherd rescue group within a 3-hour drive of Alder Creek. No one had room for a nursing mother and 2 puppies. One coordinator offered to take Pip immediately. Another could accept Cricket the following week. A rescue near Helena suggested separating Mara from both puppies once they were fully weaned. Wyatt ended that call without agreeing to anything. He told himself it was because separating them would complicate transportation. The explanation sounded sensible until he looked across the kitchen and saw Mara watching Pip and Cricket wrestle beneath the table. Some families, Wyatt thought, had already been separated enough. Mara was recovering, though patience did not appear to be among her medical skills. The deep scrape on her front leg had begun to close, but Celia Monroe had ordered limited movement, daily antibiotics, and fresh bandages every morning. Mara treated those instructions as insulting suggestions. At sunrise, she inspected the porch. After breakfast, she limped toward the barn. By mid-morning, she had usually tested the length of the leash twice and stared at Wyatt as though he were personally responsible for the existence of physical limitations. During her latest visit, Celia had crouched beside Mara and changed the bandage while the dog looked away with the dignity of a wounded queen. "She may be the worst patient in Montana," Celia said. Wyatt held Mara's shoulder steady. "There's serious competition." Mara turned her amber eyes toward him. Celia smiled without looking up. She understood that. The puppies had no interest in recovery schedules. Pip had discovered that Wyatt's socks could be removed from the laundry basket, carried through the mudroom, and deposited in the cattle trough. He never chose matching pairs. That would have suggested a plan, and Pip's methods were closer to joyful crime. Cricket was quieter, but more strategic. She had claimed the old cowboy hat that once belonged to Wyatt's father. Each time Wyatt lifted it from the chair, Cricket appeared, planted her front paws against his boot, and made a tiny growling sound too soft to frighten anything. The first time, Wyatt had put the hat back because he was tired. The 4th time, he stopped pretending. One afternoon, he attached a hose to the spigot beside the barn. Pip attacked the stream, missed, and rolled into a patch of mud. Cricket watched from a safe distance until the water moved toward her. Then she chased it with surprising determination. Within minutes, both puppies ran through the open kitchen door and scattered muddy paw prints across the floor. Wyatt stood in the center of the room, holding the hose nozzle. Pip hid behind a chair, with one of Wyatt's gloves in his mouth. Cricket climbed into the cowboy hat, turned twice, and sat down as though she had no connection to the disaster. Mara remained on the porch, observing all 3 of them. "Your leadership is questionable," Wyatt told her. Mara yawned. He complained more often now, mostly because someone was present to hear it. He also began leaving 3 bowls of water beside the kitchen wall. On the 12th morning after his return, a faded blue pickup came slowly along the ranch road. Mara rose before Wyatt heard the engine. She did not growl. Her ears lifted, and her body relaxed in a way he had not seen around strangers. The truck stopped beside the porch. The woman who climbed out was small and slightly stooped, though there was nothing weak about the way she closed the door with one hip while balancing a covered baking dish in both hands. Lenora Beckett was 71. Her short silver hair had been flattened on one side by the wind. and her fair skin carried the fine lines of someone who had spent more time beneath Montana skies than beneath ceilings. She wore a muted blue-gray button-up shirt beneath a brown knitted cardigan, dark practical trousers, and sturdy ankle boots marked with dried mud. Her face was deeply lined but alert. Her eyes had the bright, measuring quality of a retired nurse who had spent decades deciding which complaints required medicine and which required patience. She looked at Wyatt for several seconds. "You got older," she said. "So did the road. The road has better manners." Lenora walked toward the porch. Mara moved to meet her, slowly because of the injured leg. Lenora stopped. The baking dish lowered slightly in her hands. "Well," she whispered, "there you are." Wyatt watched Mara press her nose to Lenora's cardigan. The dog's tail moved once. "You know her?" Lenora looked at him, but the answer did not come immediately. "I've seen her before." That was not the same answer. Before Wyatt could ask more, Pip rushed out and collided with Lenora's boot. Cricket followed, carrying a corner of the old dish towel Wyatt had used to dry the floor. Lenora examined the puppies. "You've been home less than 2 weeks and already have 3 dogs. They're temporary." "Of course." Her tone suggested she had heard the word, used by many men shortly before permanent changes entered their lives. She carried the dish into the kitchen without waiting to be invited. Inside was a beef and potato pie with a browned crust. She set it on the counter, then removed a ring of keys from her cardigan pocket. "These are yours." Wyatt recognized the brass tag attached to them. Rourke House was written in his mother's careful handwriting. "Why do you have these?" "Your mother gave them to me." Lenora crossed the kitchen and opened a narrow cupboard beside the refrigerator. "The breaker for the north bedroom sticks during wet weather. Your father kept the spare truck key in the blue coffee tin until he forgot he had moved it. The medicine drawer is the second one from the sink. Your mother's heart tablets were kept in the back so your father wouldn't mistake them for aspirin." Wyatt remained still. Lenora knew the house with the confidence of someone who had not merely visited. She opened the drawer, checked it, and closed it again. "You were here a lot," Wyatt said. Lenora looked toward the window. "There were nights your father couldn't be alone." She did not explain. The sentence settled into the kitchen between them. Wyatt felt the first hard edge of shame rise inside him. He wanted to defend himself with dates, deployments, secure locations, and missed flights. He wanted to explain that duty did not care about Christmas or hospital appointments. But Lenora had not accused him. There was nothing to fight. She began cutting the pie. Mara lay beside her chair, as if the arrangement had been practiced. Wyatt noticed that too. After lunch, Lenora asked him to look at the eastern pasture of her property. She had lost another section of grazing land to standing water, though the last week's rainfall did not explain how long the ground remained flooded. Her ranch joined the Rourke property along a line of weathered fence posts and cottonwoods. Wyatt left Pip and Cricket inside a makeshift pen near the kitchen, while Mara came on a short leash. The Beckett land spread across a low valley beneath the mountains. Most of the grass had begun turning green, but the eastern pasture lay dark and flattened. Water reflected the white sky in shallow pools. Several fence posts leaned at odd angles where the soil had softened. Lenora stood with her hands in her cardigan pockets. "Last year, that field flooded 3 times, she said. "Before that, it happened once in 20 years. What changed? That's what I've been asking." Northcrest Holdings had offered to purchase her ranch after the second flood. The company described the offer as financial protection before environmental conditions reduced the land's value further. Lenora's mouth tightened when she repeated the phrase. They sent a young man with clean shoes and a folder thick enough to frighten a widow. He told me I could move to a retirement apartment in Great Falls. Would that be easier? Easier for whom? She pointed toward a low hill behind the house. My husband is buried there. He built the kitchen table, the south porch, and half the barn before admitting he should have measured twice. I know which floorboard complains when the house is cold. I know the nurse at the clinic and the woman who saves my pew at church. Her expression softened, but her voice did not. I don't want my last address chosen by a company that learned my name from a tax record. Wyatt looked across the flooded pasture. He understood more than he wanted to admit. Selling land was simple when the land was only acreage. It became harder when every fence post had been touched by someone dead. They followed the boundary north. Orange survey stakes appeared near the upper slope. Some had new ribbon tied around them, bright against the wet grass. Mara did not react to their color. She sniffed the ground, then continued forward. Near a broken fence section, she stopped. Her nose moved along the soil. She turned toward a patch of branches and pulled gently against the leash. Wyatt shortened it to protect her leg, but allowed her to choose the direction. Beneath the branches was a shallow trench. Inside lay a length of black plastic pipe, partly buried in mud. It came down from the higher property and pointed toward the lowest part of Lenora's pasture. Wyatt crouched and examined it. The pipe was too small to create the flooding by itself, but it was recent. The cut ends were clean, the fittings new, and oily fingerprints marked one coupling. "This wasn't here last fall," Lenora said. "You're sure? I've walked this fence since before you learned to disappoint your father." Wyatt looked up. Lenora's eyes widened slightly. "That sounded worse than I meant." No, it sounded accurate. For the first time, she seemed unsure what to say. Mara pressed her nose closer to the pipe, then recoiled, her ears lowered, and a faint tremor moved along her shoulders. Wyatt touched the oily coupling. The smell was familiar. Diesel, wet rubber, and hydraulic fluid, the same combination that had clung to the orange fibers in Mara's fur. The dog was not afraid of the pipe. She recognized what had handled it. Sheriff Wade Tolland arrived an hour later in a dusty county vehicle. Wade was 56, broad through the chest, but softening at the waist with age. His fair skin was weathered red along the cheeks. Short, graying brown hair showed beneath his campaign hat, and serious blue eyes sat in a square face that had learned to appear calm before it knew whether calm was justified. He wore a tan sheriff's shirt beneath a dark brown uniform jacket, dark duty trousers, black boots, and a standard belt polished from years of use. Wade had known Wyatt's father for decades. That familiarity made his greeting restrained. "Sorry about your folks," he said. "Thank you." Neither man attempted anything warmer. Wade inspected the pipe, photographed the trench, and checked the nearby stakes. "It may be temporary drainage from the survey crew. Across private land?" Wyatt asked. "Property line curves up there. Could be a mistake." Lenora folded her arms. "Water has made a remarkable number of mistakes since North Crest arrived." Wade exhaled. "I'll call them. We don't need accusations before we know who installed it." He was not dismissing them. That would have been easier to confront. Wade simply preferred explanations that allowed everyone to remain decent. By late afternoon, a dark sport utility vehicle rolled into the Rourke Ranch. The man who stepped out looked as though mud had never been permitted to touch him. Evan Stroud was 49, trim and carefully composed. He had a smooth, fair complexion, an angular face, neatly styled dark blonde hair touched with gray, and pale blue eyes that made steady contact without revealing much. He wore a tailored navy jacket over a pale blue open-collar shirt, charcoal trousers, and polished brown shoes poorly suited to ranch ground. He carried a leather document folder and spoke in a calm voice designed to make disagreement feel unreasonable. Evan offered condolences, praised the Rourke family's contribution to Alder Creek, and described the pressures facing modern ranchers. Then, he presented Northcrest's offer. The figure was higher than Wyatt expected. Evan explained plans for a private water retention lake, a mountain resort, and a retirement community that would bring jobs, preserve the local clinic, and help prevent the school from combining grades. Wyatt knew those promises would matter. Alder Creek was shrinking. Young families moved away. Businesses closed earlier each year. Hope did not have to be false to be used as leverage. "I'm not signing today," Wyatt said. "I wouldn't ask you to." Evan's smile remained patient. Then Mara came onto the porch. She was still on a short lead. Her bandaged leg barely touched the boards. Evan looked at her. His gaze paused on the cut in her right ear. "Has she bitten anyone?" It was the first question he asked, not whether she was injured, not whether the puppies had survived. Wyatt watched Evan's hand tighten slightly around the folder. "I found her near the creek. Strays can become unpredictable after trauma." Mara isn't a stray. The name changed something in Evan's face. Only for a moment. He recovered quickly. Mara moved closer, sniffed the chair Evan had touched, then turned her head away as if the odor offended her. Evan left the offer on the table. After his vehicle disappeared, Wyatt stood alone in the kitchen while rain began tapping against the windows. Mara walked toward the back hall and scratched once at the old storage room door. Wyatt unlocked it. The room contained his father's tools, boxes of tax receipts, fencing wire, veterinary supplies, and shelves of notebooks. Dust lay over everything except one lower drawer where the wood had been rubbed clean by frequent use. Inside was a narrow ledger. His father had recorded rainfall, creek levels, pasture conditions, survey vehicles, and the dates Lenora's fields flooded. The entries covered nearly 18 months. The pattern was unmistakable. The worst flooding followed visits by Northcrest crews to the upper slopes. On the final written page, Wyatt found an unfinished sentence. "The dog came back tonight. If she returns again, check." The next sheet had been torn out. Wyatt sat in his father's chair, with the ledger open across his knees. He looked toward the doorway. Mara lay there quietly, her amber eyes watching him. He no longer believed she had reached the Rourke ranch by chance. When Wyatt turned the ledger over, an old receipt slipped from the back cover. It listed dog food, antiseptic, gauze, and antibiotics purchased from a farm supply store. The date was 6 months earlier. Someone had cared for Mara after Northcrest claimed she was dead, and the handwriting at the bottom of the receipt belonged to Wyatt's father. By the 3rd week of May, the Rourke ranch had developed a rhythm Wyatt had not chosen but had begun to depend on. Mara woke before sunrise. She would stand beside the bedroom door, not barking, not scratching, only watching until Wyatt opened his eyes. Then she waited while he pulled on his boots and followed him to the kitchen with the solemn patience of a dog who believed dawn was a responsibility. Pip usually woke next by falling out of whatever place he had decided to sleep. Cricket woke more gracefully, stretching beneath the old cowboy hat before stepping out of it, as though emerging from a private room. Wyatt made coffee. Mara inspected the porch. Pip stole something. Cricket watched everyone and appeared to remember more than she should. The house had stopped feeling abandoned. That did not mean it felt like home. Wyatt still avoided the chair where his father used to sit. He still passed his mother's bedroom without looking inside. The last letter from his father remained unopened in the inner pocket of his jacket, though he now touched it several times a day, as if confirming the weight of unfinished words. Celia Monroe arrived shortly after breakfast with a camera, a notebook, and a folding bag of veterinary equipment. Mara's leg had healed enough that the bandage was no longer required indoors, though a narrow pink scar remained beneath the black fur. Celia examined it, checked the dog's ribs, then turned her attention to the faint tattoo inside Mara's left ear. The mark was nearly invisible. "Hold her head steady," Celia said. Wyatt crouched beside Mara and rested one hand beneath her jaw. Mara allowed the contact, though her amber eyes followed Celia's every movement. Celia photographed the tattoo, the cut near Mara's right ear, the old wear mark around her neck, and the shape of her paws. Then she tried several commands used by search and rescue handlers. Search. Mara's head lifted. Find. Her body changed. The tired ranch dog vanished. In its place stood a trained working animal, alert and focused, waiting for direction. Celia placed one of Wyatt's gloves behind a feed bin while Mara watched. Then she led the dog outside, brought her back through another door, and gave the command again. Mara found the glove within seconds. Pip, offended by the loss of what he considered his property, tried to take it back. Mara placed one paw on the glove and looked at him. Pip reconsidered his position. She was trained, Celia said. Not casually. Whoever handled her invested years. Can you identify the unit? Not from a faded ear tattoo. Celia sent the photographs to a former colleague, who had worked with County K-9 teams during wildfire searches and landslide recoveries. The answer came that afternoon. The colleague remembered seeing a German shepherd with Mara's torn ear in an old training video posted by a private security contractor connected to North Crest Holdings. The original page no longer existed. The video had been removed. Celia was still explaining this when Lenora Beckett called from Edie Harrow's diner and said they had found something that the internet had, attempted to forget but underestimated an old woman with too much storage space. Wyatt drove into town with Mara in the passenger seat, and the Puppies secured in a crate behind them. Alder Creek's Main Street consisted of a post office, a hardware store, a church with white paint peeling from the bell tower, a clinic that now closed 3 afternoons a week, and Edie Harrow's diner. The diner occupied a narrow brick building with wide front windows and a faded sign that read Harrow, though most residents simply called it Edie's. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, onions, cinnamon, and furniture polish. Edie Harrow stood behind the counter, holding a tablet in one hand and a pair of reading glasses in the other. She was 76, short and sturdy, with fair elderly skin, a round expressive face, and short white hair curled tightly around her ears. Thin glasses hung from a cord around her neck. She wore a cream blouse beneath a burgundy cardigan, dark slacks, low black shoes, and a faded diner apron decorated with a coffee stain shaped vaguely like the state of Idaho. Her eyes were sharp, humorous, and entirely unimpressed by modern technology. "I saved it because nobody in county government understands a delete button properly," she said. Sat in a booth near the back with 2 mugs of coffee. Mara settled beside her without hesitation. Edie turned the tablet toward Wyatt. The video was grainy and less than 2 minutes long. It showed a training exercise inside a concrete drainage structure. A worker wearing protective gear pretended to be trapped beneath wooden panels. Mara entered the frame with a younger, fuller body and the same torn right ear. She moved quickly, nose low, then stopped beside the hidden worker and barked 3 times. A man followed her into the drainage channel. He was in his mid-40s, lean and pale, with a narrow face, short dark hair beginning to gray, and wary brown eyes. His right wrist was wrapped in a white bandage beneath the sleeve of a worn survey jacket. Even on the video, his slight limp was visible. The caption identified him as Raymond Kessler, North Crest Field Technician. Mara sat beside Raymond when the exercise ended. He touched the side of her neck with the quiet familiarity of someone who had done it hundreds of times. Wyatt replayed the final seconds. Mara leaned toward the screen. Her ears shifted forward. "She knows him," Lenora said. Edie opened another file. This was posted 6 months later. It was not a video but a scanned notice from a contractor newsletter. The text reported a vehicle accident involving field equipment. One working dog had allegedly died, and North Crest had transferred the remaining safety work to another contractor. There was no name, no photograph, no account of how the accident happened. According to the company, Mara had been dead for half a year, yet she stood beside Wyatt's boot, alive, scarred, and raising 2 puppies. "Why lie about a dog?" Wyatt asked. Edie lifted one shoulder. "People usually lie about small things when the truth is attached to something larger." She searched through an old metal biscuit tin and removed a folded newspaper clipping. It described North Crest changing contractors after what the company called a minor equipment incident near the upper drainage sites. No workers were named. No injuries were reported. The article had been printed on the community page between a school bake sale and a photograph of the mayor holding an unusually large turnip. "That's all they ran?" Wyatt asked. "That's all North Crest gave them." Edie looked toward the diner windows. Back then, most people were grateful somebody was spending money here. Gratitude can make a town ask fewer questions than fear. Wyatt looked down at Mara. The dog had not taken her eyes from Raymond's frozen image on the screen. For the first time, Wyatt understood that Mara's past did not begin beneath Homecoming Bridge. She had worked these hills. She had followed men through tunnels, culverts, and unstable ground. And someone had decided the simplest version of her story was that she had died. Back at the ranch, life continued with a strange mixture of mystery and domestic absurdity. Mara woke Wyatt before dawn. Pip stole one glove from every pair he could reach. Cricket began raiding the old wooden box in the living room, where Wyatt's mother had stored family letters, receipts, and Christmas cards. Wyatt moved the box twice. Cricket found it both times. One afternoon, she dragged a cream-colored envelope across the floor. Wyatt recognized it before he saw the handwriting. His father's final letter. Cricket had caught one corner between her small teeth, leaving a damp crease in the paper. Wyatt crossed the room too quickly. He snatched the envelope away. "Leave it." His voice struck the walls harder than he intended. Pip dropped a sock. Cricket scrambled backward beneath the table. Mara rose. She did not bare her teeth. She did not growl. She simply stepped between Wyatt and the puppies. The movement was calm. That made it worse. Wyatt stood holding the letter in one hand, while Mara watched him with a steadiness that did not accuse but did not excuse either. For one sharp moment, Wyatt saw his father standing in the old kitchen 23 years earlier. The same rigid shoulders, the same hard voice used when fear became too embarrassing to name. Wyatt had spent half his life telling himself he left because his father did not understand him. Now 2 frightened puppies crouched beneath a table because Wyatt had sounded exactly like the man he blamed. He lowered himself slowly to the floor. Pain moved through his knee, but he welcomed it. Physical pain was honest. It did not change shape when examined. Pip emerged first. Cricket remained hidden. Wyatt placed the envelope on the floor beside him. "I'm not angry with you," he said. The puppies did not understand the words, but Mara listened. Wyatt stared at the sealed letter. "I'm angry at a dead man for leaving me things I don't know how to open." Cricket crawled out. She approached the envelope, sniffed it, then sat beside Wyatt's boot. Mara stepped away. Something inside Wyatt loosened, though not enough to let him open the letter. Later that evening, Lenora came by to check Mara's progress. When Wyatt showed her the old video, Lenora recognized Raymond. "He worked the upper survey lines," she said. "Your father mentioned him once." "What did he say?" "That Raymond kept looking over his shoulder." Lenora sat at the kitchen table, fingers folded around a cup. She explained that Wyatt's father had seen Mara near the northern survey sites several times. At first, she appeared only at night. He left food beside the old equipment shed. Later, he treated a cut along her side and cleaned mud from her paws. Then she disappeared. A few weeks before his death, Wyatt's father told Lenora that 3 old drainage ditches on the upper slope had been blocked. Those ditches once carried snowmelt away from the Beckett pasture. "He took pictures," Lenora said. "Where are they?" "No one found the camera after the accident." Wyatt looked through the kitchen window toward the darkening fields. "Do you think Northcrest caused his death?" Lenora's face changed, not with fear, with caution. "Your father's vehicle lost traction on black ice. The road was bad. He was alone. There were no signs of another vehicle." "That isn't an answer. It's the only honest one I have." Wyatt's hand tightened around the coffee cup. Part of him wanted an enemy. An enemy would simplify grief. It would turn absence into anger and guilt into purpose. He had spent years in places where danger wore a face, carried a weapon, and occupied a position on a map. But his father might have died because winter roads were cruel, and old men sometimes believed experience made them less breakable. Wyatt would not turn uncertainty into murder, simply because revenge was easier to carry than regret. 3 nights later, the town gathered in the Alder Creek Municipal Hall to hear Northcrest's official development proposal. The building smelled of dust, wet coats, and burned coffee. Nearly every chair was filled. Evan Stroud stood beside a large projected map and described a private retention lake, a mountain resort, retirement homes, walking trails, and dozens of jobs. He spoke of saving the clinic, supporting the school, expanding emergency services, and keeping Alder Creek alive. Many residents listened with genuine hope. A cattleman near the front had 2 sons living in Bozeman who did not intend to come home. A retired teacher whispered that the clinic could not afford another year of reduced hours. The hardware store owner applauded when Evan mentioned road improvements. Wyatt understood them. Desperation did not make people foolish. It made promises sound like rescue. When Evan displayed the flood map, Wyatt noticed 3 missing drainage channels. They were the same old ditches marked in his father's ledger. Wyatt raised his hand. Those channels used to carry runoff east. Evan studied the map. They silted in naturally. According to whose survey? Our engineers. Did they inspect them before or after your crews entered the upper land? The room grew quieter. Evan's expression remained polite. "Mr. Rourke, old ranch drainage is rarely consistent enough to appear in modern planning models. It was consistent enough for 80 years. At the rear of the hall, Mara stood. Wyatt had brought her because she was not ready to be left alone for long, and Celia had agreed the controlled environment was safer than pacing at home. Mara's attention fixed on a man near the exit. Raymond Kessler. He looked thinner than in the video. His gray work jacket hung loosely from his shoulders. His face was pale, and the bandage around his right wrist was darkened near the edge. Mara gave a low growl. Raymond froze. His eyes met hers. Something like guilt crossed his face. Then he left. Wyatt followed. By the time he reached the steps, Raymond had disappeared into the rain. Only one object remained near the railing. A gray rubber work glove. It was stained with red mud, hydraulic oil, and a narrow smear of fresh blood. Wyatt picked it up with a handkerchief. Mara sniffed the glove, then pulled backward. Wyatt looked into the dark street. He believed Raymond had once hurt her. Before midnight, Lenora called. Her cattle were scattered across the eastern pasture. Someone had cut the fence and left a gate hanging open. Wyatt drove over with Mara. The cattle were nervous but uninjured. Near the broken fence, Mara picked up the same oil scent from Raymond's glove. She led Wyatt north along the property line. A machine engine throbbed beyond the hill. Wyatt killed his headlights before reaching the crest. Below, a compact excavator sat beside a fresh drainage trench. A dark pickup waited nearby. The driver saw Wyatt's truck and ran. The pickup left without lights, throwing mud across the road. Wyatt did not pursue. The ground was unstable, and Mara was beside him. The excavator remained running, its bucket suspended over the new channel. Under the operator's seat, Wyatt found a crumpled work order. Most of the page used codes rather than names. One line read, R17. West House Drain. The next morning, Edie opened a county parcel map across the diner counter. She traced the lot numbers with one short finger. R17 is yours. Wyatt read the final handwritten instruction on the work order. Open after new owner takes possession. The order did not say to dig that night. It assumed the Rourke land would soon have a new owner. Wyatt had not signed anything. Yet someone had already begun preparing the ground, as if his decision no longer mattered. By the next afternoon, the excavator had become less useful as evidence than Wyatt hoped. Sheriff Warrant Paul Tulland had arranged for it to be hauled into the county maintenance yard, where a mechanic found the serial plate removed and the frame number ground nearly smooth. The ignition had been altered. The company decals had been peeled away so recently that clean rectangles remained beneath the mud. The machine had existed. The trench had existed. The work order had existed. Yet every detail that might identify an owner had been carefully erased. Evan Stroud responded through a statement delivered to the local newspaper and read aloud on the diner radio. Northcrest Holdings denied owning, leasing, or authorizing the equipment. The statement described the incident as possible vandalism intended to undermine a lawful development proposal. It did not name Wyatt. It did not need to. At Harrow's diner, conversation stopped when he entered. At the feed store, an elderly rancher who had known him as a boy glanced at the floor rather than shake his hand. Two younger men near the post office spoke loudly enough for him to hear that a person who inherited valuable land had many reasons to make buyers look dishonest. Wyatt wanted to be angry. Instead, he remembered how Alder Creek saw him. He was the son who had left at 19. He had missed his mother's final winter. He had arrived too late to bury his father beside her. He had returned with a military posture, a closed face, and plans to sell the ranch before learning which fences needed repair. The town's suspicion was unfair. It was not entirely undeserved. That was harder to fight. At the Rourke house, Pip stole the drawstring from Wyatt's hood, while Cricket sat inside the old cowboy hat and watched with solemn approval. Their small chaos usually loosened something in him. That evening it did not. Mara lay by the kitchen door, alert to every vehicle on the road. Her injured leg had improved, though she still shifted her weight away from it when tired. When Wyatt crossed the room, she tracked him with her amber eyes. "You think I staged it too?" he asked. Mara rested her chin on her paws. It was not forgiveness or judgment. It was simply presence. Across the boundary fence, Lenora Beckett received a telephone call just before dusk. The voice on the other end was low, hurried, and familiar. Raymond Kessler had not contacted her directly in months. Even when he had worked the upper survey routes, he had spoken like a man afraid every sentence might be overheard. Now his breathing came unevenly through the line. "I found the data unit," he said. Lenora stood beside her kitchen counter, one hand gripping the corded telephone. "What data unit?" "The old gauge station near your north boundary. It logged water levels and gate activity before North Crest replaced the system." "Then take it to Wade." "No." The answer came too quickly. Raymond lowered his voice. "Someone kept the complaints from moving. Maybe Wade. Maybe somebody in the county office. I don't know. But the gates on the upper holding pond are scheduled to open during the next heavy rain." Lenora looked toward the eastern pasture through the window. The sky had darkened beyond the mountains. "How heavy? Heavy enough that nobody will question the damage." A pause followed. Then Raymond added, "The recorder is still hidden inside the gauge station. If I can get it out, it shows when the gates were opened and who accessed the controls." Lenora knew the station. It was an old concrete monitoring box built beside a drainage culvert near the northern edge of her property. Her husband had once checked water levels there before the county stopped maintaining it. "Where are you now?" "Close." "Raymond, that is not an answer. I need someone who knows the land." Lenora's eyes went to the small framed photograph on the mantel. Her late husband stood beside a young cottonwood, one hand resting on a shovel, smiling with the patient exhaustion of a man who believed hard work could persuade the earth to cooperate. She should have called Wyatt immediately. She should have called Wade. Instead, she pictured Raymond alone near the culvert, hunted by the same people who had erased Mara from their records. "I'll come to the old station," she said. "Don't bring police." The line went dead. Lenora wrote a message to Wyatt on her mobile phone explaining where she was going. The signal showed 1 weak bar, then none. The message remained unsent. She put on her faded forest green raincoat over her brown cardigan. Into a canvas medical bag she packed a flashlight, bandages, antiseptic, a thermal blanket, bottled water, and the handheld radio she had kept since volunteering with county emergency services years earlier. At 71, Lenora knew courage was often confused with foolishness. She also knew fear sometimes borrowed the voice of caution to keep decent people seated. The first hard rain reached Alder Creek before sunset. At the Rourke Ranch, wind drove droplets against the windows. Wyatt was carrying feed sacks into the barn when his phone rang. Lenora's name appeared on the screen. Her voice arrived through static. "Wyatt, I'm near the old North Station." "Why?" "I heard machinery." "Raymond is here." A gust of wind swallowed her next words. "Lenora, get back to the house. There's something under the road." "I think they—" The call broke. Wyatt called again. No answer. He tried 3 more times before grabbing his rain jacket. Mara was already standing. Pip and Cricket began barking from their pen as Wyatt clipped Mara's lead to her collar. He drove the half-mile to the Beckett Ranch faster than the muddy road allowed. Lenora's front door stood open. Her blue pickup remained beside the porch. One headlight was clouded, the hood still cold. Inside, a kettle whistled on the stove until Wyatt turned off the burner. A cup sat beside the sink with a tea bag still dry. Lenora's reading glasses rested on the table. She had not planned to be gone long. Wyatt searched the rooms once, though the silence already told him she was not there. On the hook beside the door hung one of her wool scarves. A second scarf, dark red and gray, was missing. Wyatt called Wade. The sheriff arrived within 15 minutes and did not waste time debating whether Lenora had simply gone for a walk. He activated Alder Creek's volunteer search team, a loose but experienced group of ranchers, firefighters, hunters, and former emergency workers who knew the local terrain. Celia Monroe came in her Red County search and rescue waterproof shell over her slate blue work shirt. Her dark blonde hair was tucked beneath a knit cap, and her green eyes moved quickly between Wyatt, Mara, and the open door. "I'll establish first aid here," she said. "The puppies stay inside." Pip objected loudly from the kitchen. Cricket climbed onto the gate and made a smaller but more determined sound. Celia looked at them. "Your mother has enough to manage." Mara stepped to Lenora's chair. Wyatt held out the wool scarf. Mara sniffed it slowly. Her nostrils widened. She moved to the threshold, circled once, then pulled north. Wade assigned 2 volunteers to remain at the ranch with Celia and the radio. 4 others followed Wyatt and Mara into the pasture, carrying ropes, lamps, blankets, and a portable medical kit. The rain flattened the grass. Within minutes, the searchers' boots sank into mud above the ankles. Runoff streamed through hoofprints and gathered along the low ground. Darkness arrived early beneath the clouds. Mara moved with her nose near the earth, but the rain had washed away much of Lenora's trail. At the first creek crossing, she stopped. Wyatt felt the leash slacken. Mara searched left, then right. She circled twice, breathing harder. "There's too much water," one volunteer said. Wyatt did not answer. He watched Mara. The dog lifted her head. Instead of searching the ground, she approached a cottonwood, leaning over the creek. She stretched upward and sniffed a branch, caught nearly 4 feet above the present waterline. A strip of dark red and gray wool was wrapped around it. Lenora's missing scarf. Wyatt reached for it. The fabric was soaked and torn, but one end still carried her scent. More troubling was its height. The creek had already been higher than it was now. Water had risen, struck the tree, and dropped again before the search began. Mara sniffed the wool, then turned upstream with renewed certainty. Wade looked at the branch, his expression tightening. "That rise wasn't from this rain alone," he said. It was the first time Wyatt heard him admit that something did not fit a harmless explanation. They followed Mara across the northern pasture. The terrain climbed toward an abandoned county road where a large drainage culvert passed beneath a cracked strip of asphalt. The road had not carried regular traffic in years, but it still directed water from the upper slopes toward the Beckett land. Mara stopped 30 yards from the culvert. Her ears rose. Everyone else heard only rain. Then Wyatt caught it. A faint metallic impact, 3 taps, a pause. 2 more. The rhythm came from inside the culvert. It was too controlled to be debris. Someone was striking metal and saving strength between attempts. Wade moved forward but raised one hand to stop the others. No one rushes the opening. The culvert mouth was partially blocked by a fallen cottonwood, mud, broken fence wire, and a slab of concrete that had separated from the roadbed. Brown water pushed through the remaining gap. Wade examined the bank with a flashlight. "The upper edge is unstable. We put too many people there. The whole shoulder comes down." He assigned 2 men to establish a rope anchor around a mature pine. Another volunteer took position downstream. Celia remained on the radio from the Beckett house, preparing for injuries. Wyatt removed his outer jacket and clipped the rescue line to his belt. "I'm going in." Wade's jaw tightened. "You have confined space training?" "Yes. That isn't the same as this." "No. This is colder." Under other circumstances, Wade might have argued longer. The tapping came again, weaker. Wade secured the line himself. "Mara stays outside." Mara pulled toward the opening. Wyatt looked at the muddy water, the broken concrete, and the darkness beyond. He could enter alone, but without a scent trail, he might crawl past Lenora in a side chamber or flooded recess. She can find them. She's injured. She'll turn back if she can't manage it. Wade looked at Mara. The dog stood steady despite the rain, her attention fixed entirely on the culvert. "Short line," Wade said. "You bring her out before yourself if it shifts." Wyatt clipped a second safety tether to Mara's working collar. They entered through a gap barely wide enough for his shoulders. Inside, the sound of rain became distant. Water pushed around Wyatt's forearms as he crawled. The concrete smelled of rust, mud, and trapped cold. Mara moved ahead, keeping low. Once, her heeling leg slipped, and Wyatt steadied her beneath the chest. The culvert narrowed where part of the ceiling had collapsed. A slab of broken concrete blocked most of the passage, leaving a wedge-shaped opening near the floor. Beyond it came a woman's voice. Wyatt? Lenora sounded weak but unmistakably irritated. Relief hit him so hard it almost became anger. "Stay still. I had no plans to dance." Wyatt pushed through the gap. Lenora sat against the wall with one leg trapped beneath a length of broken timber. Mud covered her raincoat. Blood darkened the fabric near her ankle, but she was conscious. Beside her lay Raymond Kessler. His gray work jacket was torn at the shoulder. His narrow face had gone nearly colorless, and wet dark hair clung to his forehead. The bandage around his right wrist had unraveled, revealing a fresh cut across the palm and older scar tissue beneath it. A dented metal data case lay under one arm. Mara stopped when she saw him. Raymond did not move. For a heartbeat, Wyatt remembered the dog growling at him in the town hall. Mara approached slowly. She sniffed Raymond's face, then pressed her nose near his mouth. A second later, she looked at Wyatt. Alive. Wyatt radioed Wade. 2 found. Lenora conscious. Lower leg injury. Raymond unconscious but breathing. The extraction took nearly 40 minutes. Wyatt lifted the timber enough for Lenora to pull her leg free. He wrapped the ankle, secured her to the rope, and guided her through the broken opening, while Wade's team pulled from outside. Lenora refused to go first until Wyatt threatened to let Celia lecture her for the rest of the year. "That woman needs no encouragement," Lenora muttered. Once Lenora was clear, Wyatt returned for Raymond. The water had risen several inches. Mara stayed near Raymond's head while Wyatt fastened the harness. When the team pulled, the broken concrete shifted overhead. Mud fell in heavy clumps. Wyatt flattened himself over Mara until the movement stopped. Outside, Celia's voice came over the radio. "Bring them now." Raymond regained consciousness as Wyatt dragged him toward the opening. His brown eyes opened without focus. Then he saw Mara. His expression changed. Not fear, recognition. His uninjured hand caught Wyatt's sleeve. "The gauge station," he whispered. "Save your strength, behind the wall." His fingers tightened. They open the gates when it rains. Then his eyes closed again. The team pulled Raymond into the open air. Celia and the volunteers moved both injured people toward the waiting vehicles. Wyatt believed the rescue was over. Mara did not. She turned back toward the culvert. Mara, the dog pulled against the lead, nose aimed at the damaged concrete wall deeper inside. Wyatt followed as far as the rope allowed. A narrow crack ran vertically through the wall. Behind it should have been packed earth and stone. A dull red light blinked through the gap, once, then again. Wade came beside him. "That section hasn't had power since the county abandoned the station." Wyatt placed one hand against the concrete. A vibration moved through it. He leaned closer. Behind the wall, water rushed through a space far larger than the culvert. Then came a mechanical hum, low and steady. An engine had started, not hours ago, not before the storm. It was running now. Somewhere beyond the sealed wall, machinery was moving water through Alder Creek, while the rain gave everyone else something convenient to blame. Raymond Kessler regained consciousness beneath fluorescent lights that made every face look tired. The county clinic occupied one wing of an aging medical building. near the edge of Alder Creek. Its walls were painted a pale beige, meant to feel calm, though the color had long ago surrendered to years of disinfectant, winter boots, and worry. Raymond lay propped against two pillows with his right wrist freshly bandaged and his left ankle immobilized. His narrow face looked even thinner without rain and darkness to disguise it. Short, dark hair, threaded with early gray, lay flat against his forehead. His skin was pale, and the deep lines around his brown eyes suggested a man who had spent too long sleeping lightly. Wyatt stood near the foot of the bed. Mara lay beside him. The German shepherd's black and tan coat had been towel-dried, but damp fur still curled around her neck. Her amber eyes remained on Raymond. She was not tense in the same way she had been at the town meeting. There was no growl now, only a steady watchfulness that seemed almost patient. Celia Monroe stood by the counter wearing her slate-blue work shirt beneath an open veterinary vest. Mud stained the knees of her dark utility pants. Though she was not a human physician, she had remained until the clinic staff stabilized Lenora and Raymond, then returned from the culvert with several sealed water samples packed in a hard plastic case. Lenora sat in a wheelchair near the window, one ankle wrapped and elevated. Her short silver hair was still damp, and the forest green raincoat had been replaced by a borrowed gray blanket. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were sharp. Sheriff Wade Tolland remained near the door. No one spoke until Raymond opened his eyes fully. He saw Mara first. His breathing changed. "Mara," he whispered. The dog lifted her head. Raymond's face folded with relief so sudden and raw that Wyatt had to look away for a moment. "I thought she was dead." Wyatt's voice stayed level. North Crest said she was. Raymond closed his eyes again. They needed everyone to believe that. Wade stepped closer. "Start at the beginning." Raymond gave a weak laugh that contained no humor. "There is no beginning with men like Evan Stroud. There are only earlier lies." He looked toward Lenora. "I'm sorry." Lenora's expression softened, though only slightly. "You can apologize after you tell us why my pasture keeps trying to become a lake." Raymond swallowed. He had joined North Crest 3 years earlier as a field survey technician. At first, the work seemed ordinary. The company wanted to inspect drainage channels, map flood zones, and study the possibility of building a retention lake in the upper valley. Raymond had believed the project might help Alder Creek. He had grown up in a town where the school eventually closed, the grocery store followed, and the elderly had to travel nearly an hour for basic care. North Crest's promises sounded familiar because he had wanted similar promises to save his own hometown once. The first changes were small. A ditch was filled because engineers called it unstable. A gate was adjusted to reduce erosion. A culvert was redirected after a survey marked the original path obsolete. No single change looked criminal, Raymond said. That was the trick. North Crest did not create rain. It did not create snowmelt. It simply changed where the water went. Old drainage channels that had protected low ranches for decades were blocked with gravel and compacted soil. Temporary pipes redirected runoff. Control gates opened during heavy weather when any damage could be blamed on nature. Each flood reduced the value of the affected land. Then came insurance warnings, repair estimates, and polite letters from Evan Stroud offering to purchase the property before it became worthless. "Compassionate acquisition," Raymond said bitterly. That was the phrase. Wyatt remembered Evan's patient voice and polished shoes. "How many ranches?" Raymond stared at the blanket over his legs. 5 targeted, 2 already sold. Beckett was next. "And Rourke?" Raymond looked up. Rourke was always the key. The room grew still. The Rourke property controlled access to the western drainage corridor. Without it, North Crest could not connect the planned retention lake to the development site without expensive permits and public review. Wyatt felt the truth settle inside him like cold metal. The offer had never been generous. It had been strategic, Raymond continued. Once he understood the pattern, he began copying records, gate access logs, work orders, survey revisions, fuel receipts for machines operating at night. That was when Cole Berrigan noticed. Cole was 51, broad and work-hardened, with a thick neck, ruddy weathered skin, and a blunt face that seemed built for refusing questions. His short iron-gray hair was usually flattened beneath a work cap. Small dark eyes sat deep beneath a heavy brow, and his hands were permanently roughened by machinery, cold metal, and years of believing strength excused cruelty. He wore dark thermal shirts, oil-stained charcoal work pants, heavy black boots, and a mustard-yellow industrial rain jacket, visible from a long distance across open land. Cole did not speak often. When he did, it was usually to remind others who controlled their paychecks. He told me families always complain when progress arrives, Raymond said. Then he said accidents happen fastest to men who keep copies. Mara had worked with Raymond on slope inspections and search drills. During a small landslide near one of the upper drainage routes, Raymond became trapped beneath timber and loose soil. Mara found him. Her barking brought the crew before the ground shifted again. That rescue should have made her valuable. Instead, it made her dangerous. While finding Raymond, Mara had entered a restricted service corridor and seen workers moving equipment after midnight. Cole believed the dog could lead someone back there or react to the men involved. North Crest reported that Marba died in a vehicle accident. There had been no accident. Cole ordered her removed from the field compound. Raymond cut the tracking collar and released her through a gap in the rear fence. During a storm, she was injured, Raymond said. I gave her food and opened the gate. She ran north. He looked at Mara, his eyes shining. I thought the weather killed her. Mara rose and approached the bed. Wyatt did not stop her. She sniffed Raymond's bandaged hand. Then she pressed her nose once against his fingers. Raymond bowed his head. The low growl in the town hall had not been accusation. It had been recognition mixed with fear. Mara had not found the man who hurt her. She had found the last man who had tried to save her. For several seconds, nobody in the room spoke. Then Pip's distant bark came through Wyatt's phone, which Celia had left connected to a small camera at the ranch. Cricket answered with a softer sound. Mara's ears moved. The moment broke gently. Raymond explained that the hidden structure behind the culvert wall connected to a control chamber beneath the abandoned gauge station. The chamber regulated water from a temporary holding basin on higher ground. If the main gate opened during the coming storm, water would rush toward the Beckett pasture and the lower western section of the Rourke Ranch. The volume could damage fences, strand cattle, erode foundations, and overwhelm shallow wells. There was another risk. The North Crest equipment yard above the basin had stored diesel, hydraulic oil, and drilling supplies. Several tanks had leaked. During ordinary weather, the contamination remained near the work pad. A major release of water could carry it downhill. Celia lifted the sealed sample case. I found surface sheen and a petroleum odor, she said. That does not tell us concentration or exactly what is present. She had collected water from 3 points near the culvert, labeled each container, recorded the time, and contacted the State Environmental Laboratory. No one in the room pretended that sight and smell alone were enough. The samples would have to speak. While they waited, Evan Stroud spoke first. By noon, he had arranged a press conference outside the North Crest field office. The gathering was small, but carefully staged. A local reporter attended, along with 2 county business owners, several ranchers, and residents worried about the project's future. Evan stood beneath a white canopy in a tailored navy jacket and pale blue shirt. The wet pavement reflected his polished brown shoes. Wyatt watched from the edge of the crowd with Lenora beside him on crutches. Mara remained in the truck with the windows partly open, visible but protected from the noise. Evan described Raymond as a former employee dismissed for violating company policy. He called Wyatt's claims emotionally understandable but factually unsupported. Then he produced a document bearing the signature of Wyatt's father. The paper stated that Silas Rourke intended to sell a western portion of the ranch to North Crest. Wyatt recognized the handwriting immediately, the angle of the letters, the heavy downward stroke on the R. His father had signed it. For a moment the crowd disappeared. Wyatt saw only the signature. All the certainty he had built from ledgers, receipts, and half-finished notes shifted beneath him. Perhaps his father had not resisted North Crest. Perhaps he had wanted the sale and changed his mind only after fear or pride took hold. Perhaps Wyatt had returned and turned a complicated dead man into whatever shape his guilt required. Evan folded the document carefully. North Crest has acted in good faith from the beginning. Lenora touched Wyatt's arm. "Come with me." They returned to the Beckett house after the press conference. Lenora lowered herself into a chair and asked Wyatt to bring the wooden file box from beneath her desk. Inside were medical bills, land assessments, old tax records, and copies of correspondence. She found the document she wanted. "Your father did sign an intent to sell," she said. Wyatt stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it was his business until Evan made it yours." Lenora explained that Silas had considered selling 20 acres to pay for his wife's heart treatment and the repairs needed to keep the ranch operating. He had not done it because he wanted to abandon the land. He had done it because he was frightened of losing Wyatt's mother. He was ready to trade ground for time, Lenora said. Most people would, but after discovering the altered drainage routes, Silas withdrew. He sent a cancellation letter. The page Evan displayed was only the beginning of the record. The final page was missing from North Crest's file. Wyatt sat at the kitchen table with his father's unopened letter in front of him. For years he had imagined it contained blame, or worse, forgiveness he did not deserve. He broke the seal. The handwriting inside was less steady than on the sales document. Silas admitted he had used anger as a way to hide fear. When Wyatt left at 19, his father had acted as though rejection hurt less if he delivered it first. He wrote that the ranch should not become a chain around his son's life. Then came the line that forced Wyatt to stop reading. "If you sell, sell because you truly want another life. Do not sell only because you are afraid this place still remembers you." Wyatt pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. The letter did not ask him to stay. That was the mercy of it. His father had finally given him the choice he should have given 23 years earlier. Near the bottom was a set of instructions. West Bridge abutment, third maintenance recess, beneath the bolt with blue paint. Wyatt, Lenora, and Mara drove to Homecoming Bridge before the afternoon rain returned. The hiding place was on the western side, far from the shelf where Mara had protected her puppies. Silas had selected a dry maintenance cavity, known only to someone familiar with the bridge. Wyatt counted the bolts and reached into the recess. His fingers touched metal. The box inside was rusted at the corners, but sealed. They opened it on the truck hood. Inside lay old drainage maps, nighttime photographs of excavators, fuel receipts, the missing cancellation letter, and a memory card wrapped in wax paper. One photograph showed Evan Stroud beside the old gauge station. Sheriff Wade Tolland stood with him. Wyatt drove directly to Wade's office. The sheriff examined the photograph and did not deny being there. Evan had told him North Crest was repairing an unstable system and asked him to keep residents away from the upper road for safety. Silas later brought evidence that the work was changing water flow. Wade delayed filing it. He wanted time to verify the claims without frightening investors or destroying the project. 3 days later, Silas died on the icy ranch road. "I didn't cause the accident," Wade said. "No." Wyatt's voice was quiet. "But you made sure what he found stayed buried." Wade removed his badge and placed it on the desk. The metal sounded small against the wood. "I thought I was protecting the future of this town." Celia's phone rang before anyone answered. She listened without interrupting, then looked at Wyatt. The laboratory had found elevated diesel and hydraulic petroleum compounds moving through the drainage water toward livestock sources. Outside, thunder rolled above the valley. The forecast had changed. The heaviest rain would arrive before dawn. By 10 that night, Alder Creek had stopped arguing about whether the danger was real. The first laboratory report confirmed elevated levels of diesel fuel, hydraulic petroleum compounds, and several industrial additives in the drainage water below the abandoned gauge station. None of the substances was mysterious. That made them more frightening. They were ordinary products used around heavy equipment, storage tanks, pumps, and drilling machinery. In small spills, soil could sometimes contain them. In a powerful flood, they would travel wherever the water carried them. The greatest danger was not a single poisonous cloud or a dramatic explosion. It was thousands of gallons of contaminated runoff entering cattle ponds, shallow wells, irrigation ditches, barns, and basements before anyone understood what had happened. Raymond Kessler sat at the dining table in Lenora's house with his injured ankle elevated on a chair. His pale face looked gray under the kitchen light. A fresh bandage wrapped his right wrist, and the worn gray jacket hung over the back of another chair to dry. The metal data case recovered from the culvert lay open in front of him. Water had damaged part of its recorder, but Raymond had spent the last hour transferring what remained to an old laptop borrowed from the county office. Lines of numbers crawled across the screen: gate position, reservoir pressure, remote access, timestamps. Raymond leaned closer, his wary brown eyes moving quickly. "One gate is already opening." Wyatt stood behind him, still wearing his dark olive work shirt beneath the weathered charcoal rain jacket. Mud had dried along his dark brown ranch pants and worn leather boots. His square face remained controlled, but the muscle near his slightly crooked nose tightened. "How far?" 22%. Raymond tapped the screen. "This should require local confirmation from the control chamber." Somebody bypassed it. Sheriff Wade Tolland used the telephone beside the refrigerator to contact the state police, the county emergency manager, and the Montana Water Resources Office. His tan sheriff's shirt was wrinkled from the long day. Rain darkened the shoulders of his brown uniform jacket, and his short graying hair had begun to curl at the edges. The badge he had placed on his desk earlier was now back on his chest, not because he believed he deserved it, but because Alder Creek still needed someone to make official calls. A landslide had closed the fastest mountain road into the valley. State officers and technical crews were coming by the southern route, but they would not arrive soon enough to stop the first release. Wade ended the call and looked around the room. "We have maybe 2 hours before the heaviest rain reaches the upper basin." Raymond shook his head. "If the gate reaches 50%, the holding pond starts feeding the old western channel. After that, pressure takes over. Lenora sat near the stove with her injured ankle wrapped and raised. At 71, she looked smaller beneath her forest green raincoat than she had before the rescue, but exhaustion had not weakened her voice. Then we stopped waiting for someone with a better vehicle. She called Edie Harrow. Within 15 minutes, the diner became Alder Creek's emergency center. Edie stood behind the counter in her burgundy cardigan, cream blouse, dark slacks, and faded apron, giving orders with the authority of a woman who had served coffee through blizzards, funerals, bankruptcies, and one town council meeting that ended with a chair thrown through a window. She organized bottled water on one side of the diner and blankets on the other. Lenora contacted older residents who lived near the low road. Families with trucks volunteered to move them to the church on higher ground. Ranchers drove cattle away from the eastern pasture. The clinic posted a warning not to use shallow wells until testing was complete. No one called it an evacuation at first. People in Alder Creek were more willing to cooperate with temporary relocation. Edie understood pride well enough to choose the useful phrase. Wyatt watched people move through the diner carrying boxes, thermoses, medicine bags, and pet crates. A few of the same residents who had looked away from him days earlier now waited for instructions. He did not enjoy their sudden trust. It felt too much like command. Years of training had taught him how to divide danger into tasks. Secure this road, move those people, count vehicles, establish communication, protect the weakest first. Another part of him remembered what command cost when the map did not match reality. During his final deployment, one member of Wyatt's team had been trapped behind a collapsed wall after an extraction route failed. Orders came through the radio to withdraw before a second strike. Wyatt had followed the order. The rest of the team survived. The trapped man did not. For years, Wyatt had told himself that obedience had killed his friend. On worse nights, he told himself disobedience would have killed everyone else. He had never found a version of the memory that allowed him to rest. Wade approached him near the diner door. "We need someone to coordinate the western ranches." Wyatt looked away. "You're the sheriff. I'm also the reason half this happened without being stopped." "That doesn't make me the answer." "No," Wade said, "but it may make you the person they listen to tonight." Mara stood beside Wyatt. Her black and tan coat had dried along the back, but remained damp beneath her chest. The small cut near her right ear was sharply visible. Her healing front leg carried weight carefully, but her amber eyes were alert. Raymond's discarded glove lay sealed in an evidence bag on a nearby table. Mara moved toward it. She sniffed the plastic, then turned toward the rear door. Wyatt watched her. The glove carried hydraulic oil, red mud, and Raymond's scent. But beneath those odors was something else, a path Mara had known before. Wyatt opened the door. Rain swept across the alley. Mara pulled west. Raymond looked up from the laptop. There was another access route. Where? Old Rourke Service Tunnel. The county abandoned it before Northcrest arrived. We used it twice during early surveys. Wyatt looked toward the dark shape of his family's land beyond town. His father had known the drainage system. Mara had known the route. Once again, the path forward ran through something Wyatt had intended to sell without understanding. At the Rourke Ranch, Celia established a temporary animal station in the kitchen. Her red search and rescue shell was zipped over her slate blue shirt, and her dark blonde hair was tied firmly at the back of her neck. Pip and Cricket became frantic when Mara prepared to leave again. Pip pressed his mostly black body against the gate, one soft ear beginning to rise while the other folded sideways. Cricket stood beside him, smaller and more controlled, but her tan eyebrows lifted with visible distress. Mara went to them. She touched Pip's face, then Cricket's. The puppies quieted gradually. When Mara turned away, they moved together to the front door and lay side by side across the threshold. It was the position their mother usually chose. Wyatt paused. The puppies were not copying an action. They were holding her place. For a moment, the kitchen seemed to contain every generation of the same promise. A mother had guarded her children beneath a bridge. Now the children guarded the doorway until she returned. Wyatt looked at Celia. "If we're not back before the road closes, you will be," Celia said. "That isn't a plan. No, it's what I'm telling the puppies." Mara led Wyatt, Wade, and Raymond across the western field. Raymond used a walking stick and moved slowly on his injured ankle. Wade carried rope, a portable radio, and a waterproof tool bag. Wyatt carried a headlamp, bolt cutters, a compact pry bar, and the old drainage map from his father's metal box. The tunnel entrance lay beneath a collapsed equipment shed near the edge of the Rourke property. A rusted steel hatch had been covered by boards, weeds, and years of dirt. Raymond identified the locking mechanism. They sealed this from the outside after the first survey phase. Wyatt used the pry bar to lift the corroded latch. Cold air rose from below. The tunnel smelled of stone, iron, standing water, and machine oil. They descended one at a time. Mara went first, secured to a short safety lead. The passage was wider than the culvert but lower in places, forcing Wade and Wyatt to crouch. Water moved around their boots, ankle-deep at first, then gradually higher. Raymond explained the system as they advanced. The main gate could be closed electrically from the control room. If remote control had disabled the motor, they would need to remove a locking pin and turn the manual wheel. "How long?" Wyatt asked. "With 2 working arms. 5 minutes." Wyatt glanced at Raymond's bandaged wrist, and with one, longer than we have. The radio crackled. Edie reported that the last elderly couple from the low road had reached the church. Lenora confirmed the cattle had been moved from the Beckett pasture. The evacuation was working. The water beneath Wyatt's boots continued to rise. Raymond stumbled near a junction and caught the wall. Pain drained the color from his face. Wade looked at the swollen ankle. "You're going back. I know the system. You can know it through the radio." Raymond tried another step and nearly fell. Wyatt caught him under the arm. For 1 second, the old memory returned. A wounded man, a narrowing exit, a choice measured in lives. Wade saw something in Wyatt's face. "We take him out now," the sheriff said, "or all 3 of us become part of the problem." Wyatt looked toward the dark passage ahead, then at Raymond. He had spent years believing loyalty meant refusing to leave anyone, no matter the cost. But sometimes loyalty meant dividing the burden correctly. "Wade takes you to the side exit," Wyatt said. "You stay on the radio and guide me." Raymond resisted. "Mara knows the main passage. She worked it before." The dog stood facing forward, nose lifted toward the deeper tunnel. Wyatt handed Wade the extra rope. "Get him out, then meet us at the Western Service door." Wade nodded. No argument, no pride, just action. Wyatt and Mara continued alone. The water reached mid-calf. Fresh boot prints appeared in the mud ahead. Large soles, deep heel, one person moving toward the control chamber. No matching prints came back. Wyatt touched the impression. The mud had not yet filled with water. Someone was still inside. Mara's posture lowered. She recognized the scent before Wyatt saw the man. Cole Berrigan stood in the control chamber beneath a flickering work light. He was broad and thick through the shoulders, wearing a mustard yellow industrial rain shell over a dark thermal shirt. Oil stained his charcoal work pants. Heavy black boots stood braced against the wet floor. His blunt, ruddy face showed no surprise. One rough hand rested on the control panel. The other held a portable remote. Mara stopped. Her body tightened. Cole looked at her torn ear. Shud made sure the job was finished. Wyatt stepped between them. "Step away from the controls." Cole gave a humorless smile. "You think these ranches have a future? Half the owners are over 65. Their kids live in cities. Fences rot, wells fail. North Crest is building what comes next. You flooded people who wouldn't sell. We accelerated a decision." Cole pressed a button. Somewhere behind the wall, machinery groaned. The pressure gauge climbed. Wyatt moved forward. Cole backed toward the steel chamber door. "You're not building a future," Wyatt said. "You're making people desperate enough to sell their past." Cole swung the door inward, intending to shut Wyatt inside the flooded control room. Mara moved. She did not leap for his throat. She caught the sleeve of his yellow rain jacket and pulled sideways. Cole lost his balance. The remote struck the floor, slid through a drainage grate, and disappeared into rushing water. Wyatt forced the door back open. Then a pressure pipe ruptured. The sound cracked through the chamber like a rifle shot. Water exploded from the side wall, striking Cole and throwing him beneath a fallen support beam. His leg disappeared under the metal. Wyatt reached the outer passage. He could have kept moving. Cole had threatened Raymond, injured Mara, sabotaged ranches, and tried to trap Wyatt behind a steel door. The chamber ceiling groaned. Mara turned back. She stood beside Cole and barked 3 times. The same alert pattern from the old training video. A living person found. A rescue required. Cole stared at her. For the first time, fear stripped the hardness from his face. Wyatt returned. Together, he and Cole pushed against the beam. Cole screamed through clenched teeth as he dragged his leg free. Wyatt pulled him into the side passage, where Wade had just arrived from the service route. "Take him." Wade looked from Cole to Mara. "What about you, the gate?" Raymond's voice came through the radio. "Control panel is dead. Open the lower housing. Remove the red locking pin. Then turn the wheel clockwise." Wyatt returned to the chamber with Mara. Water reached his thighs. He found the lower housing and tore it open with the pry bar. The locking pin resisted until he struck it twice with the cutter handle. The pin released. Wyatt gripped the wheel. It did not move. He changed position and pulled again. Old pain burned through his knee and shoulder. The gauge climbed higher. Mara stood beside the safety line, paws braced on the wet floor. When the current pulled Wyatt sideways, her weight kept the rope from sliding across the chamber. The wheel shifted. 1 inch, then another. Wyatt turned it slowly, breath by breath. Raymond counted rotations through the radio. At the final turn, a deep mechanical impact rolled beneath the ground. The gauge needle dropped. Water redirected through the emergency stone basin west of the valley, away from homes, livestock ponds, and shallow wells. The relief lasted less than a second. The tunnel shook. Concrete cracked above them. Wyatt unclipped the wheel harness and ran with Mara toward the service exit. A section of steel mesh tore loose from the ceiling behind them. The current caught it and drove it forward like a net. The mesh wrapped around Mara's safety lead. She was pulled backward. Wyatt hit the floor. The rope around his own waist tightened, dragging him toward the deeper channel. He cut his line. Mara's remained trapped beneath the steel. Water rose over her chest, then reached her shoulders. Wyatt seized the rope with both hands. He pulled. The weight on the other end was no longer only Mara. The sinking mesh had become an anchor. Wyatt plunged one arm into the black water, searching for the clasp. Nothing in his training had taught him how to bargain with a river. Nothing had taught him how to ask the dead for help. Yet in the collapsing tunnel beneath the land he had nearly abandoned, Wyatt called his father's name, not in anger, not in blame. As a son asking for one more hand on the rope, Wyatt went under before Wade could reach him. The water inside the surface passage was black with mud, rust, and broken concrete. It struck Wyatt's shoulders with enough force to turn his body sideways, but his hand remained locked around Mara's safety line. He followed it downward. The steel mesh had folded around the German shepherd, like a collapsing cage. One section trapped the lead near her collar, another pressed across her back and injured front leg. Mara kicked once beneath the water, then stopped wasting what little strength remained. Wyatt could not see her face. He worked by touch. His fingers found the first twisted loop and cut it with the blade from his multi-tool. The current tore the loose wire from his hand. He reached farther, felt Mara's soaked coat, then found a second section wrapped around the strap. His lungs began to burn. For years, Wyatt had believed fear made men weak. He had trained himself to convert it into measured breathing, controlled movement, and hard decisions. But there was nothing controlled in what he felt now. He was not afraid of dying in the tunnel. He was afraid of surfacing alone. A hand caught the back of his jacket. Wade had entered from the side passage, secured by a rope around his waist. The sheriff's broad, aging body strained against the current as he braced one boot beneath a broken support. Together they lifted the edge of the mesh. Wyatt cut the final strap. Mara floated free. Her body struck his chest without movement. Wade pulled the rescue line. Men waiting at the service entrance dragged all three of them through the narrow opening as the chamber behind them gave a long, low groan. They reached the outer trench moments before part of the tunnel roof collapsed. Muddy water and concrete dust burst from the entrance. Wyatt barely noticed. He laid Mara on the wet ground. Her black and tan coat clung tightly to her ribs. The small cut near her right ear was visible through the mud. Her amber eyes were closed. Water ran from her silvered muzzle, but her chest did not rise. Wade knelt opposite him. Airway. Wyatt cleared Mara's mouth, extended her neck, and gave rescue breaths through her nose. He pressed both hands against her rib cage, careful but firm. Nothing happened. Rain struck the back of his neck. Someone called for Celia over the radio. Wyatt continued. His hands began to shake. He had noticed the trembling after operations before, always when the work was finished and nobody important could see. He would hide them in pockets, wrap them around a coffee cup, or clean equipment until the nerves remembered discipline. This time he did not hide them. "Come on," he whispered. He pressed again. "Mara, come on." Wade watched him, rain running down the weathered lines of his face. He did not offer false reassurance. Wyatt bent close and gave another breath. Mara coughed. Water spilled from her mouth. Her body convulsed once, then drew in a ragged breath that sounded too small for the relief it carried. Her eyes opened. Wyatt lowered his forehead against the side of her wet head. For a few seconds, he remained there in the mud while Wade, the volunteers, and the rain witnessed what he had spent most of his adult life concealing. He was frightened. He loved something enough to be frightened, and for the first time he did not mistake that truth for weakness. Celia met them at the Rourke Ranch because the clinic road had begun flooding near town. She converted the kitchen into an emergency treatment space, covering the table with clean blankets and arranging oxygen, warm fluids, bandages, and monitoring equipment. Mara was carried inside on a rescue board. Pip and Cricket had remained safely at the ranch throughout the tunnel operation. The moment they heard Celia's truck, both puppies began barking behind the kitchen gate. Pip, still mostly black with muddy tan paws, and one ear rising earlier than the other, climbed halfway over the barrier before Celia ordered Wyatt to hold him back. Cricket stood beside him, smaller and quieter, her tan eyebrows raised as she stared at the blanket-covered shape entering the house. Celia examined Mara's lungs, leg, heart rate, and body temperature. She worked with the same direct concentration she used whenever fear made everyone else less useful. "She inhaled water," Celia said. "She needs warmth, oxygen, antibiotics, and observation. Will she live?" Celia looked at Wyatt. Yes, the word loosened the room. Pip and Cricket were allowed near only after Mara's breathing stabilized. Cricket approached first. She pressed her nose against the small cut in Mara's right ear and licked it once. Pip searched the floor, disappeared into the mudroom, and returned carrying one of Wyatt's socks. He placed it beside Mara's head. The offering was damp, mismatched, and deeply sincere. Mara opened one eye and looked at him. Pip sat down proudly. Celia almost smiled. "That may be the least sterile medical gift I've ever seen." Wyatt picked up the sock. Mara lifted her head slightly, following it. He put it back. Over the next 3 days, the storm moved east, and Alder Creek began counting what it had nearly lost. Mara improved slowly. Her breathing cleared, but the injured front leg had taken more strain in the tunnel. Celia warned that cold weather might always bring pain and that heavy search work was no longer safe. Wyatt looked toward the porch, where Mara watched Pip and Cricket tumble through a patch of sunlight. "What happens to a working dog when it can't work anymore?" Celia followed his gaze. "That depends on whether the people around her believe work is the same thing as purpose." Mara stood when Cricket wandered too close to the steps. She moved between the puppy and the drop, then returned to her blanket. Celia nodded toward her. "She appears to have reassigned herself." The state investigation widened quickly. Cole Berrigan survived the tunnel with a fractured leg and internal bruising. Facing charges and the possibility that Evan Stroud would blame every illegal act on him, Cole agreed to cooperate. He confirmed. Evan knew the gates were used to increase flooding on targeted properties. He provided messages, work orders, access codes, and records of late-night equipment movement. Evan was investigated for falsifying documents, trespassing through contractors, concealing environmental hazards, and endangering residents. His polished statements changed in tone as evidence accumulated. First, he denied knowing. Then he blamed subcontractors. Finally, through attorneys, he described the flooding program as an unauthorized interpretation of broader development goals. No one in Alder Creek believed the softer language anymore. Wade resigned while the county reviewed his failure to act on Silas Rourke's evidence. He was not arrested, and he was not forgiven simply because he had helped in the tunnel. He released every report, photograph, message, and complaint his office had received. He testified against North Crest and accepted that some residents would never again trust his badge, even if he no longer wore it. The investigation into Silas Rourke's death reached a conclusion Wyatt had both wanted and feared. The all-terrain vehicle had lost traction on black ice. The road angle, tire marks, weather records, and damage pattern supported an accident. North Crest had not killed his father. No villain was responsible for Wyatt's absence. His mother had died from illness. His father had died on an icy road. Wyatt had stayed away because each year of silence made returning harder, and pride allowed him to call avoidance by better names. That truth did not heal him immediately. It did something quieter. It stopped him from asking another man's guilt to carry his own. North Crest's project was suspended. The damage did not vanish with the company's signs. A section of Lenora's eastern pasture would require at least 2 growing seasons to recover. Several shallow wells remained closed while the state monitored petroleum levels. Bottled water was delivered to homes for weeks. One older rancher still sold his property because the repairs had exhausted his savings and strength. Two families moved closer to relatives in Billings. Alder Creek did not become prosperous because decent people finally learned the truth. Truth prevented something worse. That was not the same as making everything easy. Edie Harrow found irrigation maps from 1987 inside a biscuit tin labeled Christmas Sugar Cookies. The County Conservation District used them to restore the old drainage channels. State water officials helped install monitors that could not be accessed privately without creating an automatic record. The church served hot meals during repair days. Ranchers brought tractors, fencing tools, gravel, and labor. Edie kept track of volunteers on the back of old diner menus because she did not trust online forms to remember human beings properly. Lenora remained in the house her husband had built. She continued to know which step creaked after midnight, which clinic nurse answered fastest, and which church pew received the morning sun. She also continued bringing food to Wyatt's house without asking permission. Wyatt canceled every pending sale document connected to the Rourke Ranch. He did not stay because his father ordered him to. The letter had done the opposite. It had released him. Wyatt stayed because, for the first time, the choice belonged completely to him. Summer changed the ranch. Mara became the strict guardian of the property, though Wyatt limited her morning patrols. When she tried to continue beyond the lower fence, he called her back. She usually obeyed after pausing long enough to express professional disagreement. Pip carried socks to the cattle barn and hid gloves inside feed buckets. Cricket continued sleeping in Silas's cowboy hat, even after she had outgrown it. By August, her front half fit inside while her hind legs rested on the chair. The house no longer knew how to be silent. Some evenings, that exhausted Wyatt. He had never been more grateful for exhaustion. He repaired the unused bedroom at the end of the hall. He replaced the window, fixed the floor, painted the walls, and put in 2 plain beds. When Lenora asked what he intended to do with it, Wyatt said it was available for veterans passing through Alder Creek who needed a place before deciding what came next. "That sounds like a recovery program," she said. "It's a room with 2 beds, a large room." Wyatt refused every name that sounded official or sentimental. He called it the living room, though it was nowhere near the actual living room. The first guest arrived in early August. Harold Hall. Mercer was 67, a widowed Army veteran of medium height with a lean, aging build. His fair skin was deeply lined around a gentle rectangular face. Thinning silver hair lay neatly combed above warm blue eyes that carried both humor and recent grief. He wore a green plaid flannel shirt beneath a faded denim jacket, dark jeans, and old brown boots polished more from habit than necessity. Hal's wife had died the previous winter. A windstorm later damaged the roof of his house outside town, and repairs would take several weeks. He arrived with 1 duffel bag, a toolbox, and the guarded politeness of a man unused to receiving help. Pip stole one of his bootlesses before he finished unpacking. Hal watched the puppy run down the hall. "That dog is part of an organized criminal operation." Wyatt glanced at Mara. "She manages security. Then corruption reaches the top." Hal helped repair the barn door and replace rotten boards on the south porch. He spoke to Mara as though she outranked both men and asked permission before using tools stored in Silas's workshop. He and Wyatt rarely discussed war, death, or loneliness directly. They talked about hinges, weather, cattle feed, and whether Pip's thefts showed planning or instinct. Wyatt began to understand that healing did not always arrive as confession. Sometimes it looked like two men fixing a door while giving each other permission not to explain why an empty house had become unbearable. Months after the flood, Homecoming Bridge reopened. The damaged concrete was reinforced, the eastern bank stabilized, and the drainage channels beneath it widened. The town saved one weathered beam from the old structure. Caleb from the hardware store carved the words while Edie supervised and complained about the spacing. The sign read, "No, one comes home alone." On a late summer afternoon, Wyatt walked across the bridge with Mara, Pip, and Cricket. Mara's limp was almost invisible on warm days. Pip had grown taller and less coordinated. Cricket walked with steady attention, glancing back whenever her brother strayed too far. At the eastern side, Mara stopped. Below them was the stretch of bank, where she had once covered her puppies with her own body, while the creek rose around them. Wyatt sat beside her. He removed his father's letter from his shirt pocket. The folds had softened from repeated reading. This time he read the final paragraph without stopping. "If one day you come back and cannot tell whether you still belong here, look to see whether anyone runs out to meet you. Home is not the place that stays unchanged. Home is the place that leaves the door open after you have changed." Wyatt looked toward the ranch. Lenora stood on the porch, waving a kitchen towel and calling that dinner was getting cold. Hal was near the barn, arguing with Pip about a missing sock. Cricket was trying to climb into a cowboy hat that had become far too small. Mara touched her nose to Wyatt's hand. Then she turned toward the house. Wyatt had once believed he rescued her beneath the bridge. But Mara had led him back to the woman who cared for his parents, the land he nearly abandoned, and the truth he had spent years avoiding. Homecoming Bridge had carried its name long before Wyatt returned. Perhaps every person needed a place that marked the moment he stopped running. Mara began walking toward the ranch. Wyatt followed. This time he did not need her to show him the way. He knew where home was. Sometimes the miracle God sends does not arrive with thunder, light, or an answer we immediately understand. Sometimes it arrives beneath a broken bridge, soaked by the rain, protecting two small lives with the last of its strength. Wyatt believed he was returning to Montana only to settle an inheritance and close the door on a painful chapter of his life. He thought the ranch held nothing but regret, unfinished conversations, and memories he was no longer strong enough to face. But God often works through the things we almost pass by. A wounded mother dog led Wyatt back to the truth about his parents, to the neighbor who had cared for them, to the land that still needed him, and finally to the part of his own heart he had kept locked away for years. The lesson of this story is not that every loss can be undone. Some goodbyes come too soon, some words remain unspoken, some fields take years to recover, and some wounds never disappear completely. But God can still bring purpose out of what was broken. He can use an animal's loyalty to remind us how to protect one another. He can use a storm to reveal what has been hidden. He can use an open door, a shared meal, or the quiet presence of someone beside us to show that we are not as alone as we believed. In everyday life, we may not face a flood or enter a collapsing tunnel, but we all know what it means to carry regret, to delay forgiveness, or to wonder whether it is too late to return. Perhaps there is someone you need to call. Perhaps there is a home you need to visit, a truth you need to face, or a person who needs to hear that they have not been forgotten. Do not wait for the perfect moment. Love rarely asks for perfection. It asks us to show up, and when life places a wounded person or a frightened animal in our path, may we remember that mercy is never wasted. The life we stop to save may become the very life that leads us home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in loyalty, second chances, and God's quiet timing. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and whether an animal has ever helped you through a difficult season of your life. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of courage, faith, healing, and the unbreakable bond between people and animals. May God bless you, protect your family, bring comfort to those you have lost, and place faithful companions beside you on every difficult road. And wherever life has taken you, may you always find an open door waiting when you are ready to come home.